The onSecurity podcast aims to inform and challenge the viewer on all things cybersecurity. Our sponsor, onShore Security, is a premier provider of full telemetry cybersecurity detection via its Panoptic Cyber Defense Service and managed security solutions.
Hey everybody, welcome again onShore onSecurity podcast. I'm Stel Valavanis, CEO of onShore Security, and of course our producer Josh Ecklow. Say hi, Josh. Hey, and with us we have Chris Johnson, who is the lead consultant at the Cybersecurity Leadership Department at onShore Security. Also does advising for a number of MSPs, GRC guy, and this is why he's here. Chris, say hi.
Hey everybody! Thanks for having me on the show.
So, Chris and you and I have talked about what, kind of these podcasts, and I should plug your podcast too. You want to give us the right plug? Give us the proper plug.
Sure. MSP 1337.
And I love your podcast, in particular that you're helping bridge that gap. I think that exists between like the enterprise side who get that there's your GRC and policy, how that drives things, and the SMB side, which just looks at products and shiny things and wants to just plug things in and walk away for a set, forget. And I love how they've been developing thanks to people like you, and that bridge is being gapped. But at onShore, we're dealing with these mid-market clients. They're kind of squarely in the middle. They got all kinds of like pressures now they haven't had, and they've been more mature than we've seen in the SMB space. But the reason I wanted to bring on board is to continue conversations we've been having about how you kind of get the horse to drink kind of thing, but also like what does that really mean? I mean, what is it we're really trying to get from all these clients? Why do we care when it's like their protections are in place and whatnot? It's almost like people are not looking at the elephant in the room of GRC compliance, oversight, whatnot. So kind of help me with that. What are they missing? How are you guiding people? What's the piece you think that really needs some highlighting today?
Well, I think about back in the day, I did a lot of web application, maybe not web application, more website content building. And I remember the first big engagement that I ever had to build a website. And I can't even remember context of client and what it was we were building. I just remember the nature of the project. And what was really interesting is, we put together this pretty snazzy WYSIWYG. This is back when Flash was the thing to do. And we got the site all built out. And what we ran into was no content. Like the client had literally, they're like, okay, so when are we going to go live with this? And we're like, when are you going to tell us what your organization actually does? What is it that you want to promote within your organization or share with the greater world around us? And there was really the answers were not very good, right? So that's what we're dealing with today in cybersecurity. And that is, we all have a pretty good understanding on some of the arenas around the detect, protect, respond, recover. We all have experience with tools, people, services in that arena. And governance has kind of often been on this sort of like out there on an island. It's reserved for large organizations. You've got to have the people and the resources to even think with a governance hat. And by and large, we ignore the elements in that GRC space, right? Governance, risk, and compliance. Right. And as a result of that, if we look across the different domains of NIST, we fall flat on our face quite often on things like protect, because while the score looks good, while our posture looks good, the reality is quite a bit darker because we're protecting what we know about. And we're doing a good job with that. But if governance isn't dialed in, if our policies aren't dialed in, then what is it that we aren't protecting that we should be?
Because you're not just talking about the, like the measurement or the or like the demonstration that we're protected. You're talking about there's gaps we don't know exist unless we do governance right.
That would be that's how I would. That's a great way to say it. That right there.
So is that all around? I mean, how integral is governance? We got, the 5 areas, whatever, how integral is governance to each of those? Maybe give me a little bit for each one.
Sure. So I think it would be very difficult to try and measure governance across each of those domains as far as how important it is to do each specifically well. However, what I would say is that when I think about governance, I think of it like this isn't one of the items in there, but I think about like playbooks or handbooks or a guide. And if I think about those things in the context of any of those others, so let's use, for example, endpoint detection and response.
Okay.
If I think about what that product service is supposed to do, and I think about it from the perspective of how it is executed and the things that it's supposed to share with me, if I don't have the governance in place, then it doesn't matter what data comes out of that, because it's not necessarily even relevant for me to take action on it, because I don't know what my risks are. I don't know what the impact to my business is going to be. And quite honestly, it may not have any bearing whatsoever on my business at all. But I got this noise coming in, giving me insights on something that is taking me away from potentially the things that are relevant to my
Yeah.
organization.
Like I'm chasing ghosts, I'm chasing down, vulnerabilities or things that, what is it I'm not chasing down? What am I ignoring or missing
Well, let's think about inventory for a minute. Inventory isn't necessarily a direct tie to security, but if I have 4 doors in my house and I've purchased 8 locks for my house, I have 4 locks that are not doing anything that I spent money on. So now as we progress forward, what kind of problems is that going to cause when I introduce someone else or I invite somebody over and I give them keys to take care of my house while I'm gone, and I give them the keys to the lock that's not actually on any door in my house?
Right. Now, why? You do that because what? You've got poor documentation or no process in place for giving out keys or
Well, all those things could be true.
Yeah.
Like all those scenarios matter, right? So the reality is we're drinking from a fire hose. I've been saying this like repeatedly today.
Yeah.
I just didn't
I like that one.
plugging my own podcast here. The last episode was literally, drinking from a fire hose, and we all do that really well in the IT managed services space. We're drinking from lots of fire hoses. That's the space we live in. We've spent the last 10, 15, 20 years learning to navigate how to consume water out of a fire hose. The thing that's interesting is that by and large, we've not done a lot on the governance side of what it is that we're responsible for with both internal and our client facing obligations. So I think about kind of like what you asked, like, okay, well, what's the process for handing out keys? What's the process for, and why does that matter? And the reality is, let's just look at it through no security lens. Well, how much money does it cost to pass out keys for doors you don't have? I mean, you're spending money on things that you could be spending on something else. And we all know that despite how much money we'd like to think we have access to or have in our budgets, ultimately someone comes knocking at some point going, hey, I'm looking at this budget report, and you've purchased 135 keys. We have 16 employees. Where are these keys going?
Right.
What doors are these keys for? We only have 4 doors, and each one of these individuals has like 8 keys. Yeah, I know. I'm not sure which key they actually need. So I just gave them a key to all of the locks that I know I've purchased over the last 10 years. I'm pretty sure one of those keys will work on the door.
Right. It sounds like giving admin accounts to users because some application doesn't get to the right file share or something. I don't,
I mean, yeah, this metaphor applies so broadly and even pretty deep that it almost, we could lose sight in metaphors for metaphors when we talk about keys and locks. But I think, like, why is governance such a touchy-feely subject? Like, why is it so, it's almost like having a sex talk with your kids. No one wants to do it, right? Like, you literally do not want to have. Isn't that like, hey, have you talked to your mom? And mom's like, have you talked to your dad? And I'm like, did you talk to your friends? You did talk to your friends. Okay, that's bad. I don't want you talking to your friends about it, right? But that's where we're at. Like, if I go and talk to a business that says, hey, we want to hire you for, let's just say it's the Panoptic product, right? Or some other service, what does that look like?
All right. So I do enjoy, where the conversation is going, and I could definitely go down that rabbit hole, pretty deep as far as, where those touch points are. But before we get kind of, because we're going to expand on that some more, I really want to make sure to introduce the idea that, you had brought to me in prior conversations about kind of when and what to outsource, because my feeling has always been that that's a big obstacle. When you're talking about GRC, we're talking about writing policies, you're talking
Sure.
about calculating risk and whatever. I feel like that's so close to the client. Like it's very hard to outsource it, or it's very like there's a lot of involvement in the client, and you kind of felt a little differently. You felt there are good ways to do that. Help me, get over that hump.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier, and I've actually had this conversation with several other business owners, and the thing that comes to mind every time is you have to own governance, you have to own risk, you have to
Okay,
own
yeah.
compliance, right? Those three things you are responsible for owning the outcome, but you're not necessarily responsible for the doing the work to get it done, right? So it's easy to not delegate these things because there's this mental assumption that I have to do it because I am responsible for my organization. And I think that this is where we have that problem. I think it's really a myth because the reality is, if I start thinking about compliance and controls, as the business owner, I'm only going to understand or know well some of those controls because I don't know any framework that only has a handful of controls, right? There's a lot to it. And so there's probably someone in your organization that would say be really good at understanding maybe access control, and that delegating to them the responsibility of gathering or hunting for the evidence to support how your organization satisfies those controls and bring that information back to you is a far better effort than you trying to go do that yourself, even if you have the time to do it, because that's not your area of expertise. There's so many other things in your organization you're responsible for. So I think that's the piece that I've been trying to help. And you and I have had this conversation, back in the day when we still had an office, that let's make an intentional effort to articulate to the rest of the organization when is our availability to just have the what do you call it, water cooler conversation, versus I have significant responsibilities for things that I have to get done. And I think governance is often overlooked because it's easy to get hung up on the things that need to be done and then taking the ownership and responsibility for doing all the work, which then puts us back into not doing any of it at all because we will allow ourselves to be distracted for the
Mhm.
water cooler conversation and a lot of other things because it's easier than to laser focus and try to get some of these things done.
But when it's out there to the organization, that's when I worry. The clients outsource this stuff to us, and I feel at a loss for really digging deep into developing a policy and a procedure with them that it
Yep.
really needs a lot of their involvement. Okay, what's the best we could do there? Like, why are
Right.
you not feeling that what I'm feeling that you can really?
I think you have to break it down a little bit. So there's the model that says there's three ways to engage me for buying something, right? So I'm going to sell you what's in my head for X dollars, and it's going to involve, maybe let's just say it's for policies. We're going to engage onshore to create policies for my organization. And I go, okay, so what policies? So we identify that there are 10 policies that your company needs, and there are three options that you can choose from. And the proposal I'm about to give back to you. Option number one, I'm going to do it for you. Option number two, I will do it with you. And option number three, you do it yourself. Obviously, me doing it for you is a really bad scenario because A, I'm going to charge you the most money because I got to do all the work. Part two of that is it's not going to end up being very pretty or sunshine and rainbows because I created it and I am not an employee in your organization and I have no control over the adoption of this policy within your organization. So we already know why option one, and I don't even know that I would put that back into what I would give you as a proposal just because I already know it's a bad idea.
Right, right.
Option number two, in my opinion, is the only way to truly be successful when something's being outsourced, and that's the do it with you model. Because I'm then encouraging you to take ownership of the policies that are going to be created, as opposed to the flip. And then the reason why number three doesn't really work very well is because number three means I am essentially giving you a template and saying, "Good luck, Godspeed," right? And the reality is, they wouldn't have come to us in the first place and say that they need help if I'm going to turn around and basically give them the IKEA manual with the wrong Allen key and say, all right, here you go. Good luck. Put it together.
Do you think that when you get to work together with somebody and they, I mean, first of all, they accept that this is valuable, has to be done. I mean, there's plenty of situations where you're pulling teeth on that too. But
Sure.
let's say they fully accept that. But there's things they own it, but they also have kind of like internal knowledge. Sometimes it's just the politics of things. Sometimes it's the reality of what's going to
Sure.
be feasible, budget wise, or some of it's just information about how they run things that isn't just apparent, and even with good documentation. So how do you get over those humps when you're doing it together, the middle model?
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really important here is that what you're doing is that my role is to help be the designer and recognize that in the paint by number, I'm going to help you choose the colors to fill it in so that the picture resembles something that is meaningful, versus I've decided what the picture is out of the gate and all of the other things that are about your organization. So I'm helping you pick blue instead of red, right? Orange instead of green. Like those types of things are where they need the most help. Again, they may be an expert on the things that they need to know about their organization, but what they're not experts on are how to create the documentation in a way that's meaningful. So it can be this simple. And I use the hello world model all the time. Back in the day when you built a website, you didn't have to be a website expert to understand some fundamentals: header, body, you had those open and close tags, font tags, and you could, with very little effort, memorize how to create the page that will show up in a website that says hello world.
Mm-hmm.
That
Awesome.
is the fundamentals of, say, a policy, where if you know what scope is and you know what the limitations are and you know what the process procedures need to look like, then that formatting becomes extremely important, so that you don't have one policy has the versioning control on page one and the other policy has versioning control on the last page, and there's no ownership and there's no, like, all of these things. They don't know how they should be structured. That's what they need help on. Content becomes the easy part. They know which server contains the policies for, or the GPOs for something. You're like, okay, hey, go get that. And then I
Right.
can help you plug that into this document so that you have actually satisfied and have a policy that you didn't know how to write. You didn't know where to get started. And the reality was that didn't matter, because all I needed you to do was go get the information and plug it in.
Okay. So even though you're not taking ownership, there's a leadership role in directing. Wait, how are we going to go about this? What information do we need to have? Here's your smorgasbord
Yep.
of ways to do it or options, and let's work together to narrow this down. So I'm not spinning my wheels making all this stuff. Templates, or you use whichever framework they're going by
Yep.
to follow through, walk through one at a time. I mean, are some of the new stuff any different? CMMC has been more lately for us. That what clients need. Is that any different with, like, as far as being able to delegate and and use it as a template or use it as a guide for all the components?
I honestly think that the weirdest piece of this is that all of the frameworks more or less are doing the same thing with different, so that the security of data is the same concept, right? So healthcare, HIPAA compliance, it's all about protecting patient health information.
Mhm.
In the PCI, it's all about credit card information, right? CMMC is all about, controlled unclassified information. So it's all about different data classification types, how you secure them. Most of the frameworks are written very similarly to achieve the same outcome. And so I think that's one of the areas that a lot of organizations struggle with. Is like, oh, I have to do CMMC because that's what we're chasing from a RFP or opportunity standpoint. And that may be fine and true, but the reality is, if they already had a framework that they had adopted, mapping or changing course a little bit to adjust policies to be fully satisfying what's now being part of a new transition for a new opportunity is not a heavy lift anymore. It's just an update. It's that annual review change that needs to happen, and we need to be doing those anyway.
Right. Yeah, a lot. I'm sure because there are tools for that, and there's been convergence, and and I mean, and people like us, we've just had to get mature there and just could, turn our hat and now work on a different framework. So we're all kind of past that stuff. I do like some of the tools out there that let you kind of flip and map pretty easily, including our scanning tools,
I mean, still, newer frameworks are dangerous at best because they're going through iterations very rapidly. And so if your focus is on the newest framework, let's just say CMMC, how long before you have to make drastic changes to what you're doing to satisfy the new changes that they've published? If I'm talking about HIPAA, there hasn't been any significant changes since it came out in 2013.
Right. Good point.
We've got a good 8 years of my business has changed and I've got to adjust, not the framework has changed and now I have to adjust.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes I think if something's mature, it often means that it can be kind of neglected because too many organizations think of it as a one and done, and man, policy is not.
That's very well said. Still, I think that's also I shouldn't leave. Let's not leave that part out. A new framework is extremely powerful and valuable because it means that our current ecosystem, our current global cultures, global financial systems, whatever you want to say, how you want to describe it, that's changed enough to merit a new framework. Right.
Yeah,
it's changed enough because you look at something like maybe Sarbanes-Oxley or SOC, some of the older frameworks have been around a really long time, COBIT, those need a revisit, right? Like, hey, yay. So this is explaining how to protect a system that was based on, latest version was in 2004.
Right.
We need to obviously adjust in our controls, but that, to your point, like, that's where new frameworks become extremely valuable, especially even if they're old frameworks, but are getting constant versioning. That's extremely valuable. That's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of CIS. I mean, it's in version 8. Less than 18 months ago, it was in version 7 and so on and so forth. It's getting an 18-month cycle, almost like software development, that is maturing a framework based on the needs of the industry.
What would you say about the kind of the attention paid to making somebody auditably secure? In other words, the different frameworks, the more mature ones, the newer ones, whatever. Do you think adequate attention is paid to making sure the outcome that you get from following these, that you have, something that can be audited, so somebody can look at you? Because even if they're not changing every year and refreshing, you're at least got some data set you're producing that somebody externally can come in and audit. How much attention is paid to there? Is it adequate?
I think recently we've seen this sort of example come to fruition. CMMC made some changes that said basically we no longer care about your POAM. That was back in 2020. And then we come into this year with the new tiered structure and they're like, and we actually care about the POAM again.
Yeah.
I think that auditability is about possibility, right? So if there is no calendar or documentation of what's been done, what is being done, and what will be done with actual dates attached to it, then that's not a very auditable company, right? Because I don't know that you have plans to do stuff because there's no evidence to say that there is. So I think that when I look at a company as far as what's auditable, it's going to be a couple things. How easy is it for me to find out your policies? Do you have a list? Do you have a plan? Like, do you have a system security plan or written information security plan that articulates the policies that you have or are in draft mode that are being developed? Do you have evidence to show how you're satisfying controls? And if you do, how are you presenting that to me? Is it something that says, that's stored in Stel's head? You will have to ask Stel. That's not gathering information. That is going and hunting for information. And anytime you have to hunt instead of gather, that is not a good auditable situation. And then probably the last one would be like, this is kind of the easy one. I don't necessarily care how well the job has been done as an auditor. I care that what you've presented to me gives me the appearance that you do care. And I think any company that's going to put the effort in to make it look like you do care, and you're doing the things that you call out that you're going to do, because to get to even a table of contents and then go, I'm just going to throw an empty, ream of white paper in after the table of contents, that's the probability of that happening is pretty low because the effort to get the table of contents done was pretty high.
Yeah, well, there's some really cynical people out there, and it's for me, it's always sad to watch that they don't really think that these regulations or these pressures are really serious. They think they're being singled out, or for that it's a formality. And
And
I mean,
sometimes they are. Sometimes they are being singled out, right?
yeah. I mean, this, I just would think that there's enough going on. There's people shouldn't be cynical about it anymore. Well, I do appreciate the good fight. I do appreciate helping elevate the whole, the ideas that governance first, and your things that you do should be, for a reason, under a framework, whatever. I think we're only kind of like notching a little few notches so far on the belt on that.
Sure.
Ultimately, it's a long fight, but it's making progress. And sadly, one of the reasons it's making progress is because all the attacks have been successful too. So, let's hope that there's more good reasons that people are finally kind of waking up to this. But I really appreciate your idea of that. Separating ownership from responsibility and getting the work done, because that's probably the biggest hurdle. So if we get people thinking that over that hurdle, like, oh my God, I got to do all this stuff.
Sure.
When am I going to keep the lights on? I think that'll make a huge difference. So, but we got some wind in our sails right now. We got some wind in our sails also, again, like I'm saying, from that kind of pressure side. I think insurance too, that's another conversation you're going to have, because we've had some recent experiences with
Yeah.
clients in insurance that were very informative. So that's another area of pressure. Anything else? Any kind of parting thought before we wrap up on this topic?
Yeah, I think there's one sort of overarching theme that I think everybody needs to be thinking about, and that comes back to the triad, right? The CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. And it doesn't matter which framework you're using. It doesn't matter who the client is. It doesn't matter if it's internal or client facing. The reality is, if you use that in your head before you do anything, whether it's GRC, protect, all of the domains, all serve one purpose, and that's tied to that triad, right? So if, as we make decisions, we use the triad as part of our decision tree process, we'll most always be on the right track, even if we don't get all the way there on the first effort.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Uh, well, thanks for that wrap, Chris, and thank you, Josh, for producing.
Thanks, guys. Great
Um,
conversation.
yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you enjoyed it too, Josh, and our audience. Hope to see you guys again on the next episode. So, goodbye from all of us here at onShore.